The desert wind carried stories long before it carried sand. And in the 3rd century after Christ, in the city of Palmyra, those stories began to whisper a single name: Zenobia. Palmyra was no ordinary outpost in the Syrian desert. It was a city of marble colonnades rising from the dunes, a bridge between Rome's empire in the west and the rich kingdoms of Persia and Arabia in the east. Merchants came from as far as India, China, and Egypt, their caravans loaded with silk, spices, ivory, and gold. Palmyra was the jewel of the desert, a city that thrived on peace and trade, until Rome's chaos spilled across the world. Zenobia was born into this world of shifting sands and politics. She was not Roman, not Persian. She was Palmyrene, proud of her desert blood. Her lineage traced back, she claimed, to Cleopatra of Egypt, and her mind was as sharp as the steel of the swords her people carried. Fluent in Greek, Aramaic, Egyptian, and Latin, Zenobia studied history and philosophy. She read Homer, Plato, and the tales of Alexander the Great. She was not raised to be silent. She was raised to understand power. When she was still young, Zenobia was married to Odenathus, the ruler of Palmyra, a man who had earned Rome's favor by defeating Persian invaders. Under Odenathus, Palmyra rose as Rome's eastern guardian, a buffer between the empire and the chaos beyond the Euphrates. Together, Zenobia and Odenathus were a rare pair, warrior and strategist, king and queen. She was not content to sit behind veils and walls. She rode beside him, led his armies, and spoke in his councils. In the desert, it was said, she could ride all day without tiring and outdrink any soldier at the campfire. But Rome was burning itself from within. Weak emperors, endless civil wars, generals turning against generals. And one night, when Odenathus rode to the north to meet a Roman delegation, he and his son were assassinated. By whom? No one knew for sure. Some said it was a rival noble, others whispered it was Roman treachery. Zenobia did not weep in public. She did not beg Rome for justice. She put on her royal robes, took her infant son Vabalithus in her arms, and declared herself regent of Palmyra. A woman, ruling alone, in a world ruled by emperors. Rome expected her to fall. They saw her as a widow, a formality, a name on a treaty. But they had never met Zenobia. She turned Palmyra into an empire of her own design, strengthening its army, forging new alliances with Arab tribes, and reviving trade even as Rome's borders crumbled. While the emperors of Rome fought among themselves, Zenobia ruled, quietly, efficiently, and with vision. She reformed taxes, protected merchants, and rebuilt the walls of her golden city. Her court shimmered with scholars and generals, and all who came to Palmyra bowed to her authority, whether Roman, Persian, or Bedouin. In the desert halls of her palace, where columns rose like the trunks of marble palms, Zenobia's word became law. She called herself Queen of the East. By 269 AD, Rome's weakness became her opportunity. The new Roman emperor, Claudius Gothicus, was far away fighting barbarians on the Danube. In his absence, Zenobia began to act, not as a governor, but as a sovereign. She sent her armies south into Egypt, where a Roman governor claimed authority. The Egyptians resisted, but Zenobia's general, Zabdas, crushed them. When word reached Rome that a woman from the desert had seized Egypt, the empire's grain basket, shock rippled through the Senate. Then, she moved north, into Syria, Arabia, and Asia Minor, sweeping across territory Rome had not defended in years. Everywhere, her banners flew, gold and purple, bearing the image of the sun god Baal and her young son's name beside her own. Vabalithus, king of kings. Zenobia, the Augusta. Coins were minted in their likeness. Roman governors fled or swore loyalty to her. In less than 2 years, half of Rome's eastern empire belonged to Zenobia of Palmyra. But Zenobia's dream was not conquest for its own sake. She saw herself as the restorer of the East, of a civilization that Rome had exploited and neglected. Her empire stretched from the Nile to the Euphrates, from the sands of Arabia to the mountains of Anatolia. And in the heart of it, Palmyra gleamed brighter than ever, its temples filled with incense, its markets with traders from 100 nations. Zenobia wore golden armor over silk robes. She presided over councils where Greek philosophers debated with Persian scholars and Arab poets recited before her throne. She was both monarch and myth in her own time, the woman who ruled without fear in an age of collapsing empires. But in Rome, new power was rising. A soldier emperor named Aurelian had taken the throne, and unlike the others, he was not content to let the East slip away. As Zenobia's legions marched deeper into Asia Minor, burning with victory, the horizon to the west began to darken. Aurelian was coming, and he was coming for her. The sands of the desert had always been Zenobia's ally, but now they carried the dust of war. Word of her victories had traveled far beyond Palmyra. Her conquest of Egypt, her rule over Syria, her dominion stretching across Asia Minor, all of it reached the ears of Aurelian, the new emperor of Rome. He was not like the men who came before him, content to let the empire rot from within. Aurelian was a soldier through and through, ruthless, disciplined, and determined to restore what he believed was Rome's divine right. At first, Zenobia tried diplomacy. She sent envoys to Aurelian with messages written in measured tones, claiming that she ruled in the name of her young son, Vabalithus, under Rome's protection. But her coins, her titles, her banners told another story. She had begun to call herself Augusta, a title reserved for Roman empresses. Her son was no longer Rome's vassal. He was its rival. Aurelian saw through her words and prepared for war. In 272 AD, his legions began their march east. The campaign was grueling, scorching heat, treacherous terrain, and scattered bands of enemies that tested even Rome's endurance. But Aurelian was relentless. City after city surrendered to his might, and by the time he reached Antioch, Zenobia's generals were waiting for him. The battle at Emi was the first great clash between Rome and Palmyra. Zenobia's trusted general Zabdas led her forces, which included swift Arab cavalry, the pride of the desert. Zenobia herself was not far behind, riding in a chariot gilded with gold, her armor catching the sun like a flame. At first, her forces seemed to have the advantage. They outmaneuvered the Romans, cutting into their flanks and driving them backward under the heat of the Syrian sun. But Aurelian, a veteran of countless campaigns, was not deceived. He feigned retreat, drawing Zenobia's cavalry into pursuit, and then unleashed his counterattack. The Roman heavy cavalry crushed the exhausted Palmyrene riders, scattering them across the desert. The defeat at Emi was devastating, but Zenobia did not surrender. She retreated to Emesa, reorganizing her forces and rallying every man still loyal to her. Letters flew across the desert to Arab allies, to Eastern princes, anyone who might stand against Rome. She would not abandon her dream. When Aurelian reached Emesa, he found a queen who still refused to kneel. Her army, though battered, fought with desperate courage. The clash was fierce and chaotic, dust, blood, and the ringing of iron beneath the burning sky. Once again, Roman discipline overcame desert fury. Zenobia's army broke. The survivors fled toward Palmyra. Zenobia herself was among them. She refused to be captured in battle. She would return to her city, to her marble halls, her golden walls, her people, and make one final stand. Aurelian followed. When he arrived at Palmyra, he found the gates closed, the queen defiant, and her soldiers lining the walls. She had sent messengers to Persia, begging for aid from the Sassanid king. If she could only hold out long enough, help might come. But time, not the sword, became her greatest enemy. The Persians never came. Supplies dwindled. The proud city that had once glowed with the wealth of the world now trembled under siege. Finally, Zenobia made a desperate choice. Disguised, she mounted a camel and fled under the cover of night with her son, hoping to cross the Euphrates and reach Persian lands. But Aurelian scouts found her before she could escape. She was captured on the banks of the river, brought before the emperor in chains. Even then, she did not bow. Her spine remained straight, her gaze steady. Some say she blamed her advisors. Others say she looked Aurelian in the eye and declared that only a woman with courage equal to his could have dared such ambition. Palmyra, leaderless and broken, surrendered soon after. Aurelian spared the city, at first, but when a rebellion later rose in Zenobia's name, he returned and crushed it utterly. Palmyra's golden age ended in fire and ruin. Zenobia was taken to Rome. Her name traveled before her, the Queen of the East, the Rebel Empress, the woman who had defied an empire. When Aurelian celebrated his triumph, She was paraded through the streets in chains of gold, walking beside her son, her face calm, her pride unbroken. Behind her came the spoils of Palmyra, silks, jewels, and treasures of the desert kingdom that had once stood between Rome and Persia. The crowd watched in silence. Some pitied her, others admired her. There was something regal even in her defeat. What happened next remains uncertain. Some say Aurelian, impressed by her dignity, spared her life. That she was given a villa near Tivoli, where she lived out her days in quiet exile, surrounded by her surviving children. Others whisper that she never accepted the life of a captive, that she starved herself rather than live in chains. Whatever the truth, Zenobia's story did not end in that Roman parade. Her empire was gone, her city reduced to ruins, but her legend endured. For in an age when kings fell and emperors devoured one another, a woman from the desert dared to dream of empire. And for a moment, she almost succeeded. The sands of Palmyra would one day bury her city, her temples, her throne, but not her name. Zenobia of Palmyra would live on in history, not as a queen who failed, but as one who defied the greatest power on earth and forced it to remember her. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.